is looking to fundamentally restructure the international trading system. And just yesterday, he announced a pause on what is called a global set of reciprocal tariffs for all countries but China.
The world just changed, and Washington was caught off guard. Canada fired the first shot in what's quickly turning into a full-blown economic war, cutting off access to the critical minerals that Tesla and the entire U.S. auto industry needs to function. In a matter of hours, supply chains froze, factories stalled, and panic spread across Wall Street. Meanwhile, China is stepping in, Europe is pulling back, and America is being squeezed out of the global auto industry, one ruthless trade deal at a time. Is this how the U.S. loses its factories, its allies, and its last grip on global economic power? It all started with a signature and a smirk. President Donald Trump had just introduced one of his most aggressive trade policies yet, a 25% tariff on Canadian auto exports to the U.S. To Washington, it was a show of strength. To Ottawa, it was an act of war. But Canada didn't blink. Newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney, a veteran of global finance, struck back fast and hard. His counterpunch? Precision-targeted tariffs on electric vehicles, key battery minerals, and cross-border auto parts. This wasn't just retaliation, it was a masterclass in strategy. Carney aimed straight at the heart of Trump's base, factory towns and swing states. The message was clear: Canada wouldn't be pushed around. Within days, trade routes jammed, ports slowed, and the world's most integrated auto supply chain began to unravel. American automakers scrambled. What started as a bold move from Washington had morphed into an industrial crisis, and for the first time in modern history, Canada wasn't reacting. It was leading, and this time, it wasn't backing down. As the supply chain buckled and factories faltered, a new player stepped onto the stage, not to negotiate, but to replace America. Tesla's supply chain collapsed overnight. The most devastating blow came when Canada restricted access to battery minerals. Tesla relies heavily on Canadian sources for nickel, aluminum, and lithium, materials that are critical and, in the short term, irreplaceable. With new tariffs driving up costs and slowing down shipments, Tesla faced a brutal reality: pay more, wait longer, or stop production altogether. The effects were immediate. Assembly lines in Nevada and California fell behind. Production delays stretched from weeks into months. For a company built on speed and innovation, the slowdown was catastrophic. Tesla's stock wobbled. Analysts sounded the alarm. The once untouchable icon of American EV manufacturing was suddenly vulnerable. The reason? Dependence. Tesla had built its empire on a supply chain deeply tied to Canada. Canadian miners, smelters, and transport companies weren't just partners, they were lifelines, and Canada knew it. In Ottawa, Carney's move was seen as a strategic masterstroke. Rather than broadly punishing America, he had singled out Tesla, the symbol of U.S. innovation, and used it as leverage. As prices soared and timelines slipped, Tesla had to make painful decisions: delay new models, cut orders, and watch customers cancel. Musk stayed defiant on social media, but inside Tesla HQ, executives were scrambling to find new sources, knowing even a short disruption could cost years of progress. And while Tesla burned, the fire spread. America's auto sales collapsed. Ford, GM, and Stellantis were hit just as hard, if not worse, by Canada's retaliation. But their crisis looked different. It wasn't just about battery materials. It was about their entire dealership ecosystem. From Texas to Michigan, dealerships began reporting delays, shortages, and sudden price hikes. Cars that used to be on lots within days were now taking weeks. Even routine service appointments started backing up as parts ran out. Dealers couldn't get transmissions. Service centers had no diagnostic chips. Showroom lots emptied. Customers, especially in small towns, were furious. The crisis wasn't just technical anymore. It was visible. Prices spiked. The average cost of a new car jumped over 15% in just a few weeks. Millions of Americans were suddenly priced out. And the used car market? It exploded. 2-year-old trucks were selling for more than new ones because at least they were available. This wasn't just a financial shock, it was psychological. Confidence in the system collapsed. Dealers lost sales. And for the first time in decades, Americans started asking, is buying American still worth it? In Ottawa, the answer was clear. The strategy was working. Canada wasn't done yet. Prime Minister Carney unleashed his boldest move, weaponizing the border. But not with noise or aggression. Carney played it smart. He subtly disrupted the norms and systems that powered U.S. economic dominance. Border inspections were intensified. Auto parts faced new layers of scrutiny. Regulatory delays, port slowdowns, and warehouse holdups all began stacking up. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even overtly hostile. But it worked. Canada didn't frame itself as the aggressor either. Carney took the global stage, delivering speeches across Europe and Asia, casting Canada as a defender of fair, rules-based trade, standing up against U.S. bullying. And the world listened. Suddenly, Canada was a symbol of fairness. The U.S. looked reckless, emotional, and short-sighted. Foreign investors noticed. European car makers began reconsidering where to place future investments. Asian battery suppliers started exploring new partnerships north of the U.S. border. And perhaps most shocking of all, governors in U.S. swing states, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, began reaching out to Ottawa quietly, asking for exemptions or localized deals to soften the blow back home. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. America wasn't calling the shots anymore. Canada was. Carney didn't just retaliate. He changed the game. What started as a typical tariff spat had now evolved into something far more serious. This wasn't just about auto parts and import percentages anymore. It was about national pride, smart strategy, and shifting global alliances. By the end of the first month of the standoff, one thing was clear: the United States had been outplayed by its closest ally. Trump's trade trap. Donald Trump was never known for subtle moves, so when Canada hit back with targeted tariffs on U.S. automakers, Trump doubled down. Through a mix of executive orders and fiery speeches, he expanded tariffs to cover Canadian raw materials and slapped new restrictions on imported auto parts. Then came his big move, a sweeping Made in America mandate aimed at forcing U.S. automakers to ditch foreign suppliers and bring production back home. To Trump's base, it sounded like a patriotic win. To economists and industry insiders, it looked like a disaster waiting to happen. American manufacturing simply wasn't ready to take on that burden. Domestic supply chains were already stretched. Labor costs were rising. And factories didn't have the bandwidth to scale up overnight. Automakers were suddenly caught in a painful transition, without a backup plan. Tariffs on Canadian nickel, lithium, and aluminum sent prices soaring. New sourcing regulations added layers of complexity and cost. Production lines slowed, delays piled up, and car frames sat unfinished in warehouses, waiting on parts. Trump sold it as a boost for American jobs. But on Wall Street, panic set in. Stocks for Ford, GM, and Stellantis tumbled. Credit ratings dipped. And while U.S. automakers struggled, foreign competitors swooped in with cheaper, ready-to-sell alternatives, free of Trump's red tape. In trying to protect the auto industry, Trump had walked it right into a trap, and the fallout was just beginning. The factory shutdown spiral. The collapse wasn't theoretical anymore. It was physical, visible. In Michigan, silence fell over Ford's Flat Rock plant. The conveyor belt stopped, doors locked, workers were sent home, indefinitely. And it wasn't just Ford. Across Ohio, Indiana, Missouri, and Illinois, factory managers announced sweeping layoffs and indefinite closures. The ripple effects of Trump's tariffs had turned into a tidal wave. Ford was first to blink, pausing EV production at 3 major facilities as costs surged. GM followed, scaling back in Lordstown and Lansing, citing market conditions. Stellantis, usually the quiet giant, cut thousands of jobs in Belvidere and warned the plant's future was in doubt. Smaller suppliers, those making parts like dashboards, seats, and wiring, were even worse off. In Dayton, 700 workers were laid off in one day. A Grand Rapids supplier shut its doors completely. The entire auto ecosystem was unraveling. Local headlines lit up. Union leaders scrambled to respond. But even they were caught flat-footed by the speed of the collapse. Trump's trade strategy hadn't just backfired, it had unleashed a chain reaction that no one could stop. And in the swing states that had formed the backbone of the American auto industry, factory towns started going dark. Cafes closed. Apartment buildings emptied. Dealerships were filled with rusting trucks that no one could afford to buy or sell. The political consequences were looming. But first came the human cost. For working-class families living paycheck to paycheck, the shutdowns weren't just inconvenient, they were devastating. Consumers pay the price. By late spring, everyday Americans were starting to feel the sting, and they were feeling it hard. Car buyers across the country were panicking. In Texas, Ford dealerships added $5,000 to sticker prices overnight. In California, used EVs were selling for more than new ones. In Florida, luxury lots sat empty, waiting on shipments that weren't coming. With tariffs choking part supplies and factories grinding to a halt, automakers couldn't meet demand. And when supply dries up, prices explode. The average price of a new vehicle in the U.S. crossed $50,000 for the first time in history. Used cars topped $32,000. Routine maintenance? Oil changes that used to cost $50 were now over $100. Replacement parts were delayed for months and marked up 300% when they arrived. Families had to make impossible choices. Some put off buying new vehicles altogether. Others sold theirs and turned to ride-sharing apps just to get around. Auto repair shops began turning customers away because they simply didn't have the parts to fix anything. And this wasn't just about transportation. These vehicles were essential for workers, single parents, rural families, and small business owners. When the cost of owning a car doubles, so does the cost of living. Inflation, already a major concern, now had a new face: the American auto market. In Washington, officials scrambled for answers. But in the heartland, the damage was done. The MAGA Backlash. It started small. A protest outside a shuttered factory in Bowling Green. A viral video of a laid-off worker in Toledo. A Facebook group of unemployed welders from Indiana asking, "What happened to America first?" Then it grew. Fox News aired segments with Trump voters who now felt abandoned. Talk radio exploded with factory workers venting frustration. Many of them lifelong Republicans, now facing missed mortgage payments and lapses in health insurance. Swing states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, once solid Trump territory, were now ground zero for working-class outrage. At a town hall in Lansing, what started as a community meeting turned into a shouting match. In rural Kentucky, conservative pastors took to the pulpit, wondering aloud if their communities had been sacrificed for political headlines. This wasn't just political fallout. This was survival. People who had placed their hopes and votes in promises to bring back jobs and rebuild industry were now left holding pink slips and overdue bills. Conclusion: a strategy that changed everything. Carney didn't just fight back. He rewrote the playbook. By leveraging Canada's critical role in the North American auto ecosystem, he exposed a fragile truth. The U.S. was more dependent than it ever admitted. Trump's aggressive trade moves were meant to bring industry home. Instead, they set off a chain reaction that shook the American economy at its core, from Wall Street to the working class. And as the standoff continues, one question echoes across factory towns and boardrooms alike. What if the real threat to American power wasn't overseas, but a miscalculation at home? They didn't get jobs, they got pink slips. Instead of seeing new jobs and revitalized industry, workers watched their plants shut down, their paychecks vanish, and their hopes for the future dim. And how did Trump respond? The only way he knew how: deflection. He pointed fingers at Canada, at Elon Musk, at Democrats. But the blame game didn't work. For the first time in years, his loyal base wasn't just disappointed, they were angry. And that anger was starting to turn into something even more dangerous than protests or online outrage. It was turning into political abandonment. With working class communities in revolt and the auto economy collapsing, the US was on the edge of something deeper, something that could reshape the nation's political and economic landscape entirely. Canada's silent trump card. Energy behind the scenes, Canada held a powerful and mostly untapped weapon: energy exports. For decades, oil and electricity have quietly flowed across the US-Canada border without drama. Pipelines crisscross the continent, power grids are deeply connected, and billions of dollars in energy trade keeps homes warm and vehicles running. But as the trade war escalated, this deep energy relationship turned from asset to vulnerability. Canada hasn't even had to cut off oil or gas exports. Just the threat of doing so has rattled Washington. And for good reason. Canada is the single largest foreign supplier of oil to the United States, providing almost half of all imported crude. If Canada turned down the tap even slightly, gas prices would spike overnight, shipping would get more expensive, everyday goods would cost more, and the Federal Reserve could be forced into emergency action to stabilize inflation. But oil is just one piece of the puzzle. Canada also supplies electricity, especially hydroelectric power, to northern US states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. In winter and during peak demand seasons, those regions depend on Canadian power to keep the lights on. A slowdown or shutdown in energy exports could mean blackouts, especially in densely populated cities. Prime Minister Mark Carney hasn't pulled the trigger. He hasn't even openly threatened to. But his administration has been careful with its words, vague, non-committal, and strategic. And that uncertainty alone has been enough to shake American energy markets. At recent press conferences, Canadian officials have hinted at diversifying energy partners, possibly prioritizing Europe or Asia instead. The message was subtle, but unmistakable. Canada holds the leverage now. Trump's immigration crackdown hits farms and factories. While the energy threat loomed, another crisis exploded across the US, one fueled by Trump's own policies. In an aggressive push to crack down on undocumented workers, the administration ramped up deportations and tightened visa restrictions. The idea was to bring back American jobs. But the reality? It backfired. Hard. Nowhere has the damage been clearer than in agriculture. For decades, US farms have relied on migrant labor, primarily from Mexico and Central America, to do the back-breaking work few Americans want. That includes picking crops, tending livestock, and keeping farms running. As deportations surged and legal work visas dried up, entire farming regions were pushed to the brink. Fields sat empty, crops rotted, harvests were abandoned. Not because of weather or equipment failure, but because there simply weren't enough people left to do the work. In states like California, Georgia, and Arizona, the labor shortage has hit critical levels. Some farms shut down permanently. Others shifted to crops that need fewer hands, cutting both production and profit. And the ripple effects were massive. With less produce reaching grocery stores, prices soared. Food inflation jumped again, and families across America felt the squeeze. It wasn't just farms either. Manufacturing, the industry Trump promised to bring roaring back, is also reeling. Immigrant workers make up a huge portion of the labor force in factories across the Midwest and South. And as that labor vanished, so did production. Assembly lines stalled. Orders were delayed. Factories operated at half capacity, or closed entirely. What was meant to be a push for job security became a self-inflicted wound. The skilled worker crisis that no one saw coming. Beneath all of this lies a deeper, longer-burning problem. America is running out of skilled workers. This isn't a new issue. It's the result of years, decades, of demographic shifts, neglected education systems, and a culture that has pushed young people away from trade work. Electricians, plumbers, welders, machine operators, HVAC techs. They're all aging out of the workforce, and there aren't enough young workers being trained to take their place. Experts have been warning about this for years. The alarm bells were there, but they were largely ignored. Now the signs are impossible to miss. Job openings in trades and construction have skyrocketed, but the talent just isn't there. Apprenticeship programs exist, but enrollment is low. Too many young Americans were steered toward college degrees that don't lead to practical, in-demand skills. The result is a strange and painful paradox. Millions of jobs are available, yet millions of Americans remain unemployed or underemployed. Construction projects are delayed for months. Manufacturing plants can't meet demand. Infrastructure upgrades stall. And without immigration to fill the gaps, the shortages only grow worse. Even companies willing to invest in training face another obstacle: time. Building a skilled workforce takes years, and America is already behind. The cultural cost of devaluing blue-collar work. Part of the problem is cultural. For an entire generation, trade jobs were painted as less than, as fallback options for people who couldn't succeed in school. Vocational training was seen as a last resort. Now, that stigma is costing the country dearly. This labor crisis isn't just economic, it's systemic, and it won't be fixed with slogans or tariffs. Not in a month, not in a year. Without real investment in trade education and a cultural reset around the value of skilled work, the U.S. will keep falling behind. One delayed project, one idle factory, and one lost paycheck at a time. The middle-class meltdown has begun. America's economy is slowing down, and that's just the beginning. Because now, with wages flat, debt piling up, and the cost of essentials climbing out of reach, the U.S. middle class is approaching a dangerous tipping point. The collapse isn't coming. It's already here, and it's starting in the heart of suburbia. For decades, the middle class was the backbone of the American dream. Steady jobs, decent homes, and a path to something better. Today, that dream is unraveling. Layoffs are rising. Wages are stuck. Bills are climbing faster than paychecks. And no one seems to know how to stop it. What's happening now isn't just another economic downturn. It's the result of years of compounding problems. Trade wars, energy instability, labor shortages, and misguided policy decisions. Together, they've created a perfect storm, and for millions of families, the safety net is gone. Mortgage rates are rising. Credit card debt is exploding. Medical bills are up. Rent has surged, not just in big cities, but even in rural areas. Everywhere you look, people are being squeezed. And the jobs that once offered security, they're disappearing. Auto manufacturing, construction, agriculture, industries that once promised stable employment are cutting hours, freezing wages, or laying off workers altogether. Families that used to feel financially secure are now one unexpected bill away from crisis. Consumer confidence is plunging. People aren't thinking about vacations or upgrading their cars. They're trying to figure out how to afford groceries next week. Small businesses, long seen as the engine of the economy, are barely holding on. They can't afford to raise wages to keep workers, and inflation is squeezing them dry. Many are closing their doors for good. The result is a vicious cycle. Less money to spend leads to lower demand. Lower demand leads to more layoffs. More layoffs means even less spending. And the loop continues. This isn't just a short-term political issue. It's a long-term economic crisis. One that could reshape the future of the country. While America struggles, China steps in. As the US and Canada battle over tariffs and trade, another player is quietly making its move: China. While Washington gets bogged down in economic infighting, Beijing is stepping in, securing the partnerships and resources that the US is now being locked out of. China is signing critical supply deals with both Canada and Mexico. It's quietly building a supply chain that runs through North America, without needing America at all. China now has preferential access to essential minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, resources that once powered American EV leaders like Tesla, Ford, and GM. And it doesn't stop at raw materials. Chinese automakers are investing in massive EV assembly plants just south of the US border in Mexico. Thanks to trade agreements like the USMCA, those cars can enter the US market without the usual import tariffs. It's a clever backdoor strategy, and it's working. In trying to wall off foreign competitors, American policy has actually opened the door wider. Automakers like BYD, NIO, and Geely are now positioned to dominate the North American EV market, while US companies struggle with rising costs, shortages, and shaken consumer trust. This isn't just economic maneuvering, it's strategic domination. America thought it was playing hardball. China is playing chess, and it's already 5 moves ahead. Europe turns away. As if trade wars and foreign competition weren't enough, another shift is happening. Quieter, but just as devastating. Europe is walking away from the US. For years, Europe was one of America's closest economic partners. US cars, tech, and innovation were welcomed across the continent. Brands like Ford and Tesla had strong European followings, thanks to reliable trade ties and political alignment. Now, that trust is breaking down. Watching America's instability and rising protectionism, European nations are rethinking everything, and they're turning to new partners. Germany is deepening its ties with South Korea and Japan to advance EV technology and parts sourcing. France is building its own domestic battery supply. The UK, post-Brexit, is investing in Scandinavia and Southeast Asia. Simply put, Europe no longer sees the US as a dependable player. Even in the showroom, the shift is visible. European dealers are pulling back on US EVs' rising prices, shipment delays, and regulatory hurdles, many caused by American policy, are driving consumers away. They're choosing homegrown and Asian options instead. This isn't about ideology, it's about reliability. And right now, the US looks unstable, unpredictable, and hard to work with. The world is hedging its bets, and increasingly, those bets aren't on America. The global auto realignment is underway. The American auto sector, once the pride of US manufacturing, is being hit from all sides. Canada has turned from a quiet ally to a strategic powerhouse. China is embedding itself into North American production. Europe is shifting alliances and looking elsewhere. Meanwhile, at home, inflation, labor shortages, and unstable policy are eroding what's left of consumer confidence. This isn't just a rough patch, it's a realignment. The global auto industry is moving on. And unless the US acts fast, not just with slogans, but with real coordinated action, it risks being left behind. The future of energy, transportation, and global trade is already being written. The question is, will America still have a seat at the table? Tariff wars, supply chain chaos, and 2 quiet winners. While American automakers are stuck fighting with Washington and scrambling to secure raw materials, 2 countries have been quietly taking the lead: Japan and South Korea. As chaos unfolds in the US auto industry, companies like Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, and Kia are executing a strategy they've been building for years, one built on stability, localized manufacturing, and global trust. Unlike many American brands that went all in on EVs, Japanese and South Korean automakers took a more balanced approach, combining electric with hybrid technology. That decision is paying off. Take Toyota. While others face battery shortages and material inflation, Toyota is leaning into hybrids, vehicles that meet emissions rules without needing massive amounts of lithium, nickel, or cobalt. As EV prices rise, consumers are shifting to hybrids in droves. Meanwhile, Hyundai and Kia are going even further. They've invested billions in US-based factories, making many of their vehicles right on American soil. That means fewer political risks, no offshoring backlash, and full eligibility for federal tax credits. Ironically, many American consumers now see their vehicles as more American than actual US brands. At the same time, Japan is leveraging deep trade ties with both Canada and Mexico, securing steady access to the parts and resources their rivals are struggling to get. No delays, no tariffs, no drama. The result? Japanese and South Korean car makers are gaining market share at a time when American companies are retreating. And this isn't just a short-term trend, it's a long-term shift. They're not just filling a gap, they're building a new automotive empire, right here on US soil. For every American job lost to shutdowns and stalled supply chains, another is being created in a Hyundai, Toyota or Kia factory. Is this the end of US auto dominance? It's a hard question, but one that's now impossible to ignore. Is America's auto industry losing its global edge for good? The warning signs are everywhere. Factories across the country are closing. Once loyal customers are walking away. Allies are distancing themselves. And global competitors, they're not just gaining ground. They're building new ecosystems right in America's backyard. The pillars that once held up America's auto dominance, innovation, reliable trade, and strong diplomacy, are crumbling. And neither political party seems to have a real plan to stop it. Trump's tariffs, designed to protect American jobs, have mostly backfired, pushing up production costs, pushing companies offshore, and making US-made vehicles less competitive. The Biden administration's EV push and green subsidies, while ambitious, have created a confusing, fragmented market that many automakers are struggling to navigate. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is moving forward. Canada has shown it won't be pushed around. Mexico is becoming a hub for Asian and European auto production. China is bypassing US restrictions and locking in strategic partnerships in North America. Europe is quietly backing out of the American supply chain altogether. In the space America used to dominate, new alliances are forming, and they don't include the US. This isn't just an economic issue anymore. It's a geopolitical shift. America spent decades building its auto empire through trust, trade, and tech leadership. Now, policy missteps, trade fights, and global frustration are chipping away at that legacy. So, what happens now? Can the US auto industry bounce back? The answer depends entirely on what happens next, and how quickly. Without a coordinated national strategy to stabilize trade, rebuild global trust, and reinvest in domestic manufacturing, the decline will continue, and probably accelerate. But with bold action, smart trade deals, targeted investment, support for modern factories, and serious workforce development, there's still time to turn things around. The world hasn't forgotten America's role in shaping the auto industry. But the longer this continues, the more likely it is that the world will stop waiting. And eventually, the question won't be whether US auto dominance is over. It'll be, how long before the world forgets it ever existed? We're in the middle of a global reset, and America's position in the auto industry is no longer guaranteed. While Japan and South Korea are expanding, while China is embedding, and while Europe is moving on, the US is at a crossroads. If this collapse caught you off guard, subscribe, stay informed, and drop a comment. Can American auto leadership still be saved? Or has the world already moved on?